in particular the Palazzo Vecchio. The construction of this palace fortress began in 1299 under the direction of Arsène. Originally, it was called the Palazzo della Signoria and was the seat of the government of Florence. On the main facade, beneath the arches of the passageway, a series of coats of arms are painted, including the historic emblem of the city. The tower, 94 meters high, is not in the center of the building. It is a crenellated belfry in the typical Tuscan architectural style. The original clock, constructed by Donatello, was replaced in 1667. After crossing the entrance, the Hall of the 500 was the Hall of the People's Representatives set up by Savonarola's Republic, which had driven the first Medici from power before the return of Cosimo I. Here as well, the statues symbolize Florence's victories over its rivals. Like those of Michelangelo with his Genius of Victory. Measuring 54 meters long by 23 meters wide with a height of 18 meters, the walls of the hall have frescoes by Vasari showing Florence's victories over the cities of Siena and Pisa. Formerly a symbolic space of the Florentine Republic, after the return of Cosimo I, the Hall of the 500 became the place where the Duke gave people audiences and maintained a personality cult glorifying the Medici family. To accentuate the size of the hall, Vasari, on the advice of Michelangelo, raised the ceiling by 7 meters. This coffered ceiling, composed of 39 panels painted by Vasari himself at his studio, exalts Cosimo I and his house. His creation is truly a masterpiece. The studiolo was the study of Cosimo I's son, Francesco I de' Medici. Set up around 1570, the young prince filled it with chemistry instruments. Indeed, he was passionate about alchemy, which is to say, the science of the era. He shut himself away there for his alchemical and scientific research, and the paintings that decorate the room are dedicated as much to themes of human activities as to myths related to the world of the occult. The room contains works by Bronzino, Naldini, Santi di Tito, and Stradano, all directed by Vasari and all evoking the progress of knowledge and science in allegorical form. At the center of the ceiling, there's a fresco depicting Prometheus receiving the jewels of nature, which is intended to be the starting point for the entire cycle of decorative paintings, and is a masterpiece of the late Mannerist period. Another room was created in honor of the first great Medici who reigned 100 years earlier. The banker Cosimo the Elder became a shrewd politician who was able to endear himself to the people in order to challenge the major families who were then in power. He was the founder of the main branch of the family and was in his time probably the richest man in Europe, the banker of the kings and popes. The paintings recall some moments from his life as well as his love for the arts and knowledge. His grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, also marked the history of Florence and earned himself a room as well. He continued the work of his ancestors, concentrating the political and economic control of the Florentine Republic. He had exceptional intellectual gifts. An author of poems, a refined collector, a patron of artists like Mikelangelo, he influenced the taste of his era. In Vasari's frescoes, we see him surrounded by the great politicians of Europe as well as philosophers and writers. His son here, who receives the hat of a cardinal under his watch, will become Pope Leo X. This pope also has a room in his honor in the palace. In a scene painted by Vasari, we can see Leo X's triumphal entry to Florence at Signoria Square, where you can see the Palazzo Vecchio and the Loggia. The private chapel of the Duchess Eleonora of Toledo, the wife of Cosimo I, was decorated by Agnolo Bronzino between 1540 and 1565. It constitutes one of the greatest masterpieces of Florentine mannerism. The decorated walls tell the story of Moses while also celebrating the power of the Medici. The paintings in the Chapel of the Priors are the work of Ridolfo Ghirlandaio, the son of the famous painter. They affirm the moral and religious principles that should have guided the decisions of the government and the people gathered here to pray. The four evangelists, Mark, John, Matthew, and Luke, are depicted on the ceiling against a background of golden mosaics. In the audience chamber, Cosimo I received his subjects. The richly decorated room contains allegorical frescoes painted by Francesco Salviati in 1545. They tell the stories of Furio Camillo, a Roman general returned from exile who liberated Rome from the Gauls in 390 BC. In reference to the return of Cosimo to Florence after the Medici's exile in the early 16th century. While the Palazzo Vecchio is famous for its frescoes, the Bargello Palace is famous for its sculptures. Built in 1255, it was the headquarters of the city's police and a prison in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, before being turned into a museum in the 19th century. The interior courtyard features beautiful arcades and a monumental staircase leading to the Loggia Verona. Amongst the statues exhibited outside, there is St. Paul's Cannon, which is made in 1625 by Cosimo Cenni for Ferdinand II of Tuscany. It bears the name St. Paul because the name evokes the booming voice of the apostle, whose head is represented in the round on the breech of the cannon. A beautiful Mannerist fountain opens the way to the treasures exhibited here.